Happy Christmas Eve, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Amelie podcast. I don't want to be too negative today. It's such a festive day for a lot of people, so I'm going to try and keep it light, but I'm going to be talking about my time in Nicaragua in this episode. I'd kind of pictured volcano views and gorgeous weather, but I ended up booking a bus 4 days later to Costa Rica. Sam and I went to two different cities in Nicaragua. We went to Leon and Granada. So I'm going to tell you all about these places and also where I think we went wrong when we were visiting Nicaragua. To give you some context, it is a 16-hour bus ride from Antigua, Guatemala, all the way to Leon in Nicaragua. If you've listened to the previous episode talking about Antigua, Guatemala, you will know that I got completely stranded there, and it seemed like we were never going to leave that town. But finally, we were able to book a bus that was going to take us the entire journey, no stops, no breaks, nothing, which we really, really wanted, because it was going to be such a long travel day and we'd rather just get it all out in one go. You travel through El Salvador and Honduras, and I feel like if I'd done a bit more research, maybe El Salvador would be somewhere I would definitely want to stay and maybe do a few days. It's a really big surfing community there, and also just driving through, it's such a beautiful country. Whereas Honduras, I'm quite glad we kind of skipped out on, if I'm honest. It felt quite dangerous and the border was enough for me to kind of be fine with missing that one out, if I'm honest. I think also at the time we didn't stop in either of these countries because we'd been told that they were quite dangerous at that point. There were loads of travelers there, so maybe it was just kind of rumors going around. But for us, we didn't really want to risk it. And to be honest, we were quite keen on getting to Nicaragua because it just meant we were closer to places like Costa Rica and Panama. So my advice for this 16-hour journey, if you are going to do it, is bring so much water and make sure to bring snacks. Maybe even download some films or something if you have an iPad or your phone or whatever, because it is going to get extremely boring sitting in a van or a car for that amount of time. I honestly just downloaded so much music and so many podcasts. Sometimes I get a bit travel nauseous when I'm looking at a film or something whilst in a car. So for me, it was kind of just podcasts and music for 16 hours. It was a day trip, so I was actually fully awake for the entire thing. Anyway, we arrive at the long border to Nicaragua. I mean, when I say long, I don't mean like physically distance long, like walking over the border. I mean that it took forever for us to get through this border. And I think we realized in the backpacker community, it's kind of notorious, this border between Honduras and Nicaragua. It's going to be a long process. You have to queue up. They have to check you. You have to scan bags. And it was a very, very interesting border because we did it in the dark. And I can't say I felt the safest, if I'm honest. There's also a lot of stray dogs walking around, and particularly dogs that are on heat. So actually there was a lot of blood on the floor. Don't know if that's TMI, but it was just feeling a bit grungy, let's say. And I wasn't feeling the most safe. And then obviously we drove to Leon, and I don't remember the specific timings for that drive, but I can't remember it feeling too long. But let's get into Leon and all of Nicaragua's hidden gems. Leon is an artsy, gritty, colonial town, I would say, but it is hot. And I mean hot. I have never experienced, I'm honestly sweating thinking about it. It was unbearably hot. And things like their technology, I can't say are massively up to date. I mean, our hostel didn't really have Wi-Fi or aircon. And whilst aircon might feel like a luxury at a lot of hostels, depending on your budget, Wi-Fi definitely wasn't a luxury we found in a lot of hostels. A lot of them would have at least Wi-Fi because they needed it to book people in and things like that. So if you're one of those people that wants to have one of those experiences traveling where you have no technology and you kind of just disconnect from everything, which I highly recommend if that's something you're looking for, I feel like our hostel would have been the best place for that, or Leon in general. The thing that Leon is famous for is this volcano boarding activity that you can do where you essentially hike up a volcano for an hour and then slide down on, I guess, like sleds almost. You just sit on these things and you slide down. Sam and I didn't actually do this because we'd just come from Antigua and we'd done Volcano Acatenango and we'd done that whole experience and hike. And some people on that hike had told us that coming from Acatenango going straight to volcano boarding can actually be a bit disappointing because it's not the same experience at all. Something that was really interesting as well is that it costs basically the same thing. And I feel like when you've just done Acatenango and it's this 2-day hike and it's one of the most amazing experiences, I feel like paying the same amount for that and then hiking for an hour and going down a volcano once, I don't know, I can't really justify paying the same amount. I feel like you get a lot more out of your experience when you're in Guatemala. So I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying if you're trying to travel cheaply, I would pick one. But personally, I mean, I would go for the Acatenango hike if you can. After seeing videos though, it did look like a really fun activity. I think you hike up this volcano, you get given this orange jumpsuit that looks quite cool and maybe even goggles, and you slide down this volcano, which I feel like if you're an adrenaline junkie is probably going to be one of the best activities for you. And then we saw that some of the buses that will take you back to your hostel from the volcano hike or like the volcano sledding, they're almost like mini parties or something, or kind of like a party bus kind of vibe, which I think if that's something you're looking to do would be a really, really, really fun experience. It'd also be a really good opportunity to meet people, I feel, because then you're socializing. You don't even necessarily have to drink alcohol, but just being in close proximity with people, like being at a hostel, is going to be so much more fun. Now I'm thinking about it as well, I feel like Sam and I didn't do this volcano hike or the kind of volcano sledding because we knew that we were going to end up in Peru and we were going to be doing sandboarding when we were there. It's not necessarily the same thing because obviously one's a volcano, one is sand dunes, but I feel like they're very, very similar, and we knew that the sandboarding was going to be a lot cheaper, and so I think we were kind of just holding out and waiting till we got to Peru to do something like that. Leon itself though is an extremely, extremely colourful place. I would say that the street art is absolutely beautiful. One thing that we'd seen that you have to do if you are in Leon in Nicaragua is walk on top of the cathedral in the centre square. We were lucky enough to do this during our very, very short visit. But okay, let me paint you a picture. We had been exploring the town. I think Sam had even gotten his first haircut in Central America, which was extremely hilarious because try and explain skin fade to somebody in Nicaragua when you both don't speak each other's language. And yeah, it was just a very, very interesting experience. I'm trying to communicate, but I don't really know how to say that in Spanish. So that was interesting. But we are going through the town of Leon. We're going into different shops. I think they even had a Shein shop, which I found kind of insane. Everything was from Shein, and I've never seen that before. We don't get that in the UK as far as I know. But we eventually circled back to the centre square and we wanted to go and walk on the cathedral. It was also starting to be sunset, so we thought this would be one of the best times to do it. But we went to the tourist office and they said, sorry, it's closed, you can't do it. And the annoying thing was we were leaving the next day. So we were a bit like, okay, we haven't really done anything to kind of mark us being in Leon. Somehow, I have no idea, somehow Sam sort of sneaks around the back of this cathedral and sees that there's this tiny entrance to the cathedral, and it's kind of like a stone door or something, or like a stone archway in a way, and it's just a random guy saying, yep, this is where you get your tickets. And we went and got our tickets, and we paid almost nothing for these tickets, and we were able to climb the cathedral. We started walking up these stone steps of the cathedral, and at some point during our climb you have to take your shoes off, and I think from what I remember it was out of respect and so that you didn't damage the top of the cathedral, because obviously it's extremely precious and a lot of people are going to be walking on this every day. But it was one of the absolute best sunsets I think we've ever watched. I feel like I say that in every episode. I feel like every sunset was the best sunset, but if anything, this really, really was one of the best sunsets, if you can believe my word. But being on top of the cathedral and just seeing all the volcanoes and all the beautiful views, seeing the town of Leon from a high point, was absolutely stunning. And I think when you have such a small amount of time somewhere, you want to be able to try and take as much of it in as possible. And this was one of the best ways to do it. And then we actually ended up finishing our day with a 90p ice cream from this, I think it's like a chain in Nicaragua maybe, because we ended up seeing another one in Granada, but it was a 90p ice cream, best ice cream, and it was the perfect way to end our day. And I feel like when you're in Leon or in Nicaragua in general, you are going to want to have ice cream all the time. It is extremely hot there, so it was one of the nicest ways to cool down, because also in the evening it doesn't cool down. There is no sort of cool off point. So that is something to be conscious about, especially when you're packing clothes. You are going to want to take vest tops, shorts, sandals. Do not bring any long sleeves. I promise you won't need them. The next morning, we decided to head off to Granada because that was our next destination in Nicaragua. It wasn't a long bus ride from what I remember, and I just remember it being quite pleasant. I think it was fine. We stopped off in the capital of Nicaragua because we were dropping some people off that were on our bus or our van. And I remember really understanding the difference between these small towns like Leon and eventually Granada compared to the capital, because the capital had things like McDonald's, it had all these big shopping centers, all these big car parks. And when you've just come from somewhere like Leon, it was a bit of a culture shock, maybe a bit like, how are we in the same country? This is very strange to me. And then arriving in Granada kind of felt like another culture shock. I feel like Granada's kind of made for postcards, maybe, in terms of there being horse-drawn carts. And in general, it just feels very, very old school. We wanted to go here because we saw that Granada is right next to Lake Nicaragua, and we thought this would be the best way to cool off. I think you can take boat tours on the lake. We didn't do it, but I've seen from researching. When we arrived in Granada, we were extremely excited to go and swim, and we couldn't wait to cool off because it was absolutely horrific. The heat was so intense. And then we got told that you cannot swim in the lake because of pollution. I don't know if that was specifically because of where we were staying. I don't know if this is a general rule. I don't know if you can swim anywhere in the lake. Maybe you can, or maybe we were just misinformed, but we were absolutely devastated. So instead, we spent our first day when we arrived just exploring the town and honestly trying to appreciate all of the different colors of Granada. I feel like coming from Mexico and Guatemala, you see all these really colorful, vibrant towns, and you can really see how that just carries on through into Nicaragua. There's such a colorful and vibrant aesthetic to all of these towns. I mean, some of the colors of the houses were absolutely unreal. I mean, I was sitting there thinking we should bring this back to the UK. Like, get rid of these grey skyscrapers. We need bright red buildings, bright pink, bright blue. Like, it was absolutely stunning. And then, of course, our first night was spent eating a lot of ice cream. But actually, the next day, we decided that we were going to go to this place called Laguna Beach Club, which was a 40-minute drive from our hostel. I feel like when I say Laguna Beach Club, you're kind of thinking like 5-star resort, like really cool beach club. But we were on a backpacker's budget, and so I can't say this was like some 5-star resort. It was absolutely amazing for what we needed. We did it very cheaply. So I don't want people to be scared off from the fact that I've said beach club and maybe it sounds a bit posher than it actually is. But anyway, we went to this beach club, and I don't think that we got there the most traditional way. Because it was a 40-minute drive from our hostel, we were kind of stuffed because we couldn't see any kind of buses or any transport to get there. It was really in the middle of nowhere, if I'm honest. So the way we ended up getting there was our hostel owner, or our hostess, called her dad to bring his taxi and drive us there. We would pay him for the day, and he would drive us there and then come and collect us later that afternoon. I don't know if that's normal. I don't know how people usually get there, but that was how we did it. And honestly, it was actually the best thing ever. It was kind of just like getting a private car to this beach club. I really recommend actually staying at this place that we went to, though, because we didn't realize, but this place was actually a hostel in itself. So you can stay there. And I think if we'd known that, maybe we would have picked to stay there instead. You were basically on this small lake, and you had access to swimming and doing all of these fun activities like paddleboarding, canoeing, whatever you wanted. And it was at no extra charge, which we absolutely loved. We were able to grab some breakfast, some lunch. You can order kind of like it's a restaurant in a way. And it was honestly the perfect way to spend the day and cool off, because I think also being in Nicaragua and it being so extremely hot, I don't know if it's just me, you get extremely hot and bothered, and I was not in the best mood, I think, for majority of Nicaragua, because I just could not handle the heat. It was absolutely exhausting, and even just walking anywhere just felt like such a chore, because it was almost like wading through the air. That's how it felt. Or trying to like break the air so that you could move past it, and then not being able to come back and cool off, because even the showers that we had in both of our hostels were not that great. I think it just kind of builds up and maybe explains why we ended up only staying 4 days in this entire country. But anyway, after this beach day, I did get extremely burnt. Yeah, it was actually probably the worst I've ever been burnt, especially on our trip in its entirety. I couldn't actually carry my backpacks because my shoulders were so bad. So PSA, wear sun cream is all I can say. But anyway, as a summary for Granada, I just want to say that I feel like it's such a beautiful place, but for me, there just didn't feel like a lot going on. And I think we felt quite isolated in what we could do. Maybe that was because of the weather, and it was quite difficult for us to kind of find the motivation to get up and do things. But yeah, it wasn't my favorite place. I think the lake and the beach club was so much fun, and I couldn't recommend it more. But apart from that, there wasn't loads to do. So we left the next day, and we actually ended up getting a bus to Costa Rica. But I just want to take a minute to maybe kind of reflect and talk about why I think Nicaragua didn't click for Sam and I, or me personally, and maybe give out some advice for anybody who finds themselves somewhere where they're just not clicking with a place, because I feel like this can happen quite a lot when you're traveling. Nicaragua as a country, I have to say, was not one of my favorites at all, but I cannot fault the people. The people we met in our hostel were absolutely lovely. The people who drove us to certain locations, helped us across the border, absolutely lovely people. Cannot fault them at all. I appreciated their kindness so much, especially when I wasn't feeling 100% and feeling great about where we were. That actually kind of made the experience and made it a lot better. I just think also it's important to talk about the fact that not every place you visit is going to steal your heart, and not every place you see you're going to absolutely fall in love with. So I guess the question is, how do you decide when to cut your losses and when to stick something out? But that is something that only you can decide in the moment, I feel. Sometimes it's about appreciating the moment and then just moving on. For me personally, I feel like it's intuition. I feel like the women are going to understand this. If somewhere does not feel right for you, then it's completely fine to miss that out. I know that sometimes there can be pressures to enjoy something, especially when you've been excited about going somewhere, but if it doesn't live up to your expectations, then that's completely fine. And it's fine that something hasn't turned out the way you want it to. Because I feel like the most important thing to remember is that you are the one that has to carry on with this trip. No one else is going to have to endure what you're doing. And so if you're not happy with it, then just change it. I also hate the idea that people will feel kind of worried or maybe embarrassed, or kind of like they're disappointing people when they're not enjoying something that they were excited about or at least curious about. But I do want to say that anyone who is outside of the present moment that you are in doesn't need to have a say in it. You don't need to worry about what they're thinking. I feel like I definitely felt this at times, maybe even in Nicaragua, because Nicaragua, I feel, for me, was quite an odd location to go to in terms of it's not always traveled to. It's obviously got quite an intense history, and I was really excited to be able to go and at least say that I'd experienced Nicaragua as a place. And I didn't want people to think that I was maybe taking it for granted or like wasting time, but in actuality I was just trying to experience what I could. And then I was extremely happy to just move on, and I ended up absolutely loving Costa Rica. So I just don't want people to feel like they've put expectations on something, and then if it doesn't live up to that hype, that they need to be hard on themselves or feel bad about themselves, because you're the one having this experience. And the best part about traveling is that you're in control. If you don't like something, you can leave it. It's completely fine. And obviously there can be times where if you stick something out, it does get better. I definitely think that we found that in some countries we went to. It could be a case of you haven't found your crowd in a hostel yet, or maybe you haven't found really fun activities to do in a country or a town, or you're feeling like you can't enjoy the food or whatever it is, but maybe you just haven't found the right parts. But sticking something out is also completely okay to do as well. Like I say, it's your journey and it's your time, so you get to control what's happening. I also feel like maybe there can be some guilt if you spend some time just sitting in your dorm bed, or you just want to sit by yourself and not socialize and write in a journal or do some drawing or whatever it is. I just want to say I don't think that that's bad at all. I don't think you can see that as wasting time, or I don't think it should be frowned upon if you want to do that, because sometimes you need those moments. I really think that it's all down to you and your intuition and how comfortable you're feeling. And also, don't put yourself in a situation that you don't want to be in just to say you've been there. I really feel like that's what I was kind of talking about with Nicaragua as a country. I really wanted to go, and maybe part of me was just saying that because I just wanted to say I'd been somewhere like there, because not a lot of people have been to Nicaragua, but then got there and realized actually this is not where I want to be. And that's completely fine. Had I known maybe what Nicaragua was going to be like, it would have been fine to skip it if I didn't want to go. You really just have to make those decisions based off of how you're feeling. I guess as a whole, it's just this idea that travel can really help you bring perspective. And I feel like you can bring in those skills to your everyday life. So it's kind of a win-win for everyone. But I just wanted to kind of make a point of talking about why I think Nicaragua didn't click with us, but also why it's not that bad that it didn't click with us, and that it's actually fine. And this happens when you're traveling, especially when you're traveling to multiple countries. Not every single one is going to be your favorite. Now it's time for the Amelie Moran ranking system. So I have said food and drink, 5 out of 10. I wasn't a big fan of the Nicaragua food. I actually feel like they served more Western food than anything else. I don't think I really had anything authentic. Maybe that was down to me. I don't remember, but I just don't remember there being a lot of authentic places to eat. Nightlife, 6 out of 10. I don't feel like I can really comment on it too much other than from what I saw. I didn't do any big nights out drinking or anything in Nicaragua. Sam and I went out for dinner and we would explore during the evening, but I just feel like it didn't feel very safe, either place, Leon or Granada, where we went. I just felt like it wasn't... If I was a solo female traveler, I would have personally felt quite nervous. But then again, if you're in a group of people, I think you're completely fine. History and culture, I've said 8 out of 10 because the culture in Nicaragua is really beautiful and the colors are stunning over there. The people are absolutely lovely. And there is a lot of really, really interesting and very rich history in Nicaragua as a country. Accessibility and English level, I've said 4 out of 10 because this was the first country, I think, where I really had to hone in my Spanish skills and really, really, really try to exercise my Spanish, because a lot of people did not speak English and there was not a lot of Wi-Fi. Our data, I think, was even a bit dodgy. So Google Translate just wasn't really a thing. And I really tried to communicate with everybody. But if you're going to Nicaragua, I would recommend learning a few Spanish phrases because I don't think a lot of people are going to be speaking English. Safety, I've said 7 out of 10. I think in general it feels quite safe, but like I said, sort of talking about the nightlife, just got to be quite wary, just got to be aware of your surroundings. And it's kind of like any other advice I would give on safety, just being aware and just don't flash things too much. Expenses, I've said 8 out of 10, and I say this because Nicaragua was quite cheap as a country. So in terms of expenses, it was actually quite positive for us. We were able to save a bit of money that we thought we were going to have to spend. So I would definitely say Nicaragua is one of those cheaper countries to travel. And overall, I've given Nicaragua 6 out of 10. It just made me realize in general that travel is not about loving every single place, and you're not going to love every single place. You just have to be open to different experiences, even if it's not perfect. If you've been to Nicaragua, please DM me or email me, whichever one, and tell me what your experience was like, because maybe I've missed something. Maybe I've completely missed the boat. Maybe there were some great things that we could have done that I completely looked over, and I would absolutely love to hear all about them. I really hope this episode has helped you, and I'm really hoping everyone has a really lovely Christmas Eve. I will see you in the next episode. Make sure to subscribe and like the podcast. Merry Christmas!